September 15, 1942, 13:45 Eastern Solomon Sea. For the USS Wasp, the day had unfolded as expected, with routine flight operations keeping the crew engaged from morning into the afternoon. The flight deck and hangar bays bustled with activity as aircraft were launched and recovered. However, unknown to those aboard, danger was rapidly closing in. Soon, the Wasp should face a devastating attack that would seal its fate. This video covers the torpedo attack on USS Wasp by the Japanese submarine I-19 on September 15, 1942. We will begin by examining events leading up to this fateful encounter, starting with the strategic situation following the Second Battle of the Solomon Sea. Although the US Navy emerged victorious from the battle, the overall balance of the power in the region remained uncertain. To strengthen its position, the US prioritized reinforcing its forces, including deploying the 7th Marine Regiment and striving for air superiority to hinder Japanese movement. However, the Navy continued to grapple with significant challenges. A critical challenge for the US Navy was its limited number of operational aircraft carriers. Despite Japan's recent defeat, its carrier force remained formidable, consisting of two medium-sized carriers, Shokaku and Shikaku, two light carriers, Zuiho and Ruiho, and the fleet carrier Haiyu. Some of these vessels were originally intended for other roles but were intended into carriers before completion, significantly boosting Japan's naval aviation strength after 1942. Between the Battle of the Eastern Solomons and the Battle of the Santa Cruz Island, Japan consistently maintained a numerical advantage in carrier forces over the US Navy. Meanwhile, the US Navy had already suffered significant carrier losses. USS Lexington was sunk at the Battle of the Coral Sea, and USS Yorktown was lost at Midway. USS Enterprise sustained heavy damage during the Second Battle of the Solomon Sea and had to be sent back to the US for repairs. USS Rangers remained assigned to the Atlantic Fleet at its deployment to the Pacific was strongly opposed due to its inadequate defenses and relatively slow speed. Consequently, by August 25, 1942, the US Navy had only three operational carriers in the Pacific: Saratoga, Hornet, and Wasp. To disrupt Japanese reinforcement and prepare for possible carrier engagements, the US Navy needed to station its carrier in the Solomon Sea. However, moving too close risked exposure to Japanese long-range reconnaissance aircraft, while staying too distant could hinder their ability to respond effectively. To strike a balance, the US established a patrol route between Ranal Island and the Santa Cruz Island, an area within the operational range of American carrier aircraft, yet beyond the reach of Japanese Zero fighters. However, the repetitive nature of this patrol pattern made it easier for Japan to concentrate its attack. Task Force 11, Saratoga, Task Force 17, Hornet, and the Task Force 18, Wasp alternated patrols, with one carrier withdrawing to Espirito Santo for rest and refueling. When Enterprise was operational for carriers routed in Paris, but after its temporary loss, the remaining three had to shoulder an even greater operational burden. Despite these challenges, the carriers conducted daily patrols, vigilantly scanning for the intercepting Japanese aircraft and warships attempting to approach Guadalcanal. For the Japanese Navy, the persistent presence of the US carrier patrols posed a major challenge. Direct attacks by surface forces were too risky, while air strikes were hindered by range limitations. This left Japan with two primary options: engage the US carriers in a decisive battle using its own carrier fleet, or deploy submarines to eliminate them. Prior to the Guadalcanal landings, Japan had positioned Halder submarines from the 7th Submarine Squadron throughout the Solomon Sea. However, following the US invasion, Japan bolstered its presence with larger, more advanced submarines. On August 15, 1942, As US and Japanese carrier forces maneuvered near Guadalcanal, Japan deployed its first submarine squadron, comprising I 9, I 17, I 26, and I 19, under the command of Takazuki Nashi. Departing from Yokosuka at high speed, the submarines maintained a loose formation while making their way to the Solomon Sea. As the squadron passed near the Bonian Island, an area where US submarines were known to patrol, they adopted zigzag maneuvers to reduce the risk of detection. After 5 days, they reached the northern Solomon Sea, where the battle for Guadalcanal was escalating across air, sea, and even underwater engagements. The US Navy maintained extensive reconnaissance operations throughout the region, relying on SBD Dauntless bombers from Henderson Field and B 17 bombers from more distant bases.